So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Cossa. A round of applause.
Well, thank you. Good morning, ni hao, and aloha, as we say in Hawaii. I'm delighted to be back in Taiwan and honored to be part of the Yushan Forum, which I have learned a great deal just listening in the last couple of days. I am personally a political military affairs specialist who's been working on regional security issues for the past 50 years. When I started, security and military affairs were pretty much synonymous. We spent a lot of time counting tanks, airplanes, and missiles and the such. Today, we're still counting tanks and missiles and airplanes, but as this meeting has reinforced, security is a much more complicated issue. As a political scientist, I try to avoid talking about economic and trade issues. This is no longer possible, particularly today when we see some countries increasingly engaged in economic coercion. At the end of the Second World War, the US and Western powers tried something new. In addition to rebuilding their own economies, they helped their enemies. Japan and Germany were rebuilt as part of an interconnected economic and security community, and it worked. Today, no one is concerned about Japan or Germany, despite them being very powerful and rich countries within their respective regions. Well, we tried the same thing when it came to China and Russia after the end of the Cold War. We discovered, I think, a very unfortunate lesson that instead of seeing this as an opportunity to build international cooperation, Moscow and Beijing tried to take advantage of economic interdependence to coerce and blackmail their neighbors. This is why today we are talking about de-risking and diversification. Taiwan, as we saw yesterday, once again providing an example both of how difficult this is, but also how necessary it is and how to go about it. Yesterday and this morning, we also talked about energy and food security, about environmental and climate change challenges, and even about the dangers of people-to-people programs and information, or more accurately, disinformation challenges enhanced by social media, which was originally intended as a community-building effort, but is now being used as part of a propaganda and disinformation effort that we have to deal with. The security challenge today is indeed multidimensional. Taiwan knows this very well. While many are counting Chinese tanks, planes, and missiles and debating when, not if, China will be ready to take military force against Taiwan, the truth is that Taiwan is already under attack by the PRC, economically, politically, psychologically through propaganda and disinformation campaigns, and militarily through its so-called gray zone activities short of the kinetic use of military force. This is a multidimensional threat that requires a multidimensional response, one that I believe my country, the United States of America, is prepared and willing to lead. As Taiwanese know very well, democracy can be a pretty messy affair, and partisan politics often captures the headlines. But I'm here to remind you, to assure you, that despite great partisan divides in the US Congress and in the United States, when it comes to supporting Taiwan democracy, there is broad bipartisan support, and the US will continue to stand by Taiwan and supporting Taiwan democracy as a beacon of hope for this region and globally. If you'll forgive a little shameless self-promotion, I just recently helped lead a multinational research effort aimed at articulating the implications globally should Taiwan fall to China. We brought together authors from Japan, Korea, Australia, India, the EU, and the United States to discuss this question in hopes that greater awareness of the consequences would result in greater multinational efforts to prevent such an event from happening in the first place. What our authors discovered was that while much had been written about if, how, and when Beijing might invade Taiwan, hardly anything has been written on the consequences should this effectively occur. Time prevents me from discussing the results here, other than to say the consequences would be enormous and affect global as well as regional security. You can read the report itself, again, some shameless self-promotion on a Pacific Forum website. It's entitled The World After Taiwan Falls. I think it is up to research institutes, think tanks such as my own, such as TAEF, to ask these hard questions and to help create public awareness. In our democracies, it requires public support, and it is our mission, I think, and our responsibility to help advise the public on the dangers that are involved in not being prepared to deal with and prevent these kind of implications. We must also, I think, involve the next generation in these efforts. Some 20 years ago, Pacific Forum established a Young Leaders Program aimed at bringing up-and-coming young scholars and junior officials to our senior-level dialogues to learn and share next-generation views. This is critical, and again, I commend TAEF for its own next-generation programs. Ours has involved over 1,200 young people from more than 50 different countries over the past 2 decades, with many of them now graduating into more senior leadership positions. Allow me to tell you a story about one of these initial efforts where we approached the foreign ministry here in Taiwan as we were running an international conference in Taipei and asked if we could bring some young Chinese scholars. This was at a time before there was this kind of cross-strait interaction. The foreign ministry was initially kind of hesitant, but finally gave in and allowed us to bring these young Chinese to this meeting. So as the meeting was ended, I asked one of the young Chinese what his impressions were, what impressed him the most. In addition to noting that young people here in Taipei spoke better Chinese than many of his colleagues in Shanghai and elsewhere on the mainland, he said the thing that impressed him the most was Taiwan taxicab drivers. What do you mean, I asked. He said, well, I got in a cab, and the taxicab driver was complaining the whole time about how dysfunctional and terrible his government was. Then I got in another cab, and the driver was talking about how good his government was. Then in another cab, the cab driver was complaining, but for a whole different set of reasons. Now, we can give lectures and teach courses about the value of freedom of expression, but the lessons that young Chinese scholar learned just by riding in taxi cabs in Taiwan had a more lasting impact on his understanding of the values of democracy. This is why it's critically important, I think, to bring young people to these various meetings. I know that there are concerns about bringing young people to our country. But we need to have faith in our own democratic values and in the example that our countries show when we bring these young people in. Another story, if I might. We've had visiting Chinese fellows conducting research at the Pacific Forum, including some young PLA officers, and in one instance, the son of a very senior military officer in China. About a year later, I went and visited him and his father and asked him about his impressions of his 6 months in Honolulu. He said one of the lasting things that impressed him was all of the friends that he built on Facebook and in social media. And I said, well, isn't that a problem now that these things are blocked in China? And he just laughed. And he said, you know, this affects people like you when you try to access. My generation knows how to get around Chinese firewalls and keep contact with our friends. His father was, I think, both embarrassed and yet secretly proud of him. I was delighted by this example. because again, it demonstrated what exposure to the West could do, and the creativity of these young people. I asked another young Chinese scholar while she was studying at Pacific Forum, and at a time when the PRC was becoming more and more aggressive, is this a result of Xi Jinping's self-confidence, or is it a result of his insecurity that we see this increased aggressiveness? Her answer was, to me, remarkable. She said, China is very self-confident when it comes to you, when it comes to the West. China is very insecure when it comes to me, to my generation of young people in China. I think these were great words of wisdom, and again, it talks to the importance of reaching out to the young people. We should be, I know there are dangers and concerns about having young Chinese at Western universities and et cetera, and obviously we don't want to invite them to our military bases or open up certain doors to them, but bringing them to Taiwan, bringing them to the United States, bringing them to other democratic societies, and letting them witness firsthand the freedom and democracy in a way that we can't teach in books. I think this is critical to the future. Let me say, if I could also put in a plug for a multilateral organization that the Pacific Forum helped establish some 30 years ago, the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, or CSCAP, which brings one of the few, if not the only forum that allows Taiwanese scholars and former officials to sit down with their Chinese counterparts, as well as their counterparts from throughout Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, including, believe it or not, North Korea, which is a member of this group, to sit down and talk about security issues. Now, I think we would all agree that Taiwan deserves a place in the so-called Track 1 or governmental forums, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit. But until such day as we can allow that to happen, I think it's critical that it remain engaged in the so-called Track 1.5, Track 2 organizations to allow this dialogue to continue. Finally, as we look to the future, I would again commend the Yushan Forum for presenting a model for future cooperation and collaboration among like-minded countries. I want to issue a word of warning, however. I, as well as I think everyone in this room, is glad to extol the virtues of democracy. But we really need to be reaching out not just to countries that are currently democratic, but to those who share our concerns. I'm old enough to remember when, if democracy were the ticket for entry, Taiwan, South Korea, and others would not have been allowed in the room. But we continued that dialogue, and I think it helped to expose young people and older people, both in Taiwan and South Korea, to the virtues of democracy and the need to pursue that. And of course, today we have vibrant democracies in both countries, and we need to be doing that with others, particularly in Southeast Asia, who today may be less democratic, but who share our security concerns about certain governments in the region. This way they can learn firsthand, like our young Chinese student who we brought to Taipei so many years ago learned. Let me conclude by finishing that story. That young Chinese student is today an American citizen working in Honolulu, hoping that one day his counterparts on the mainland will have the same opportunities to experience freedom and democracy that he has had. And again, I commend Yushan Forum and TAEF for its efforts in trying to bring that about. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the future discussions. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cossa, for your insights and wisdom. Please take your seat on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will move on to the panel discussion. In this session, we are honored to have invited Dr. I-Chung, President of the Prospect Foundation, to serve as the moderator. So, Dr. Lai, please come up to the stage. A warm welcome. Thanks. And now we're going to invite the panelists. Please come up to the stage. Mr. Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of National Maritime Foundation, India. And next, we're going to invite from Thailand, Mr. Sustarum Thammaboosadee, founding member of Future Forward Party, Thailand. And now we're going to welcome Mr. Enoch, Director of Forward Alliance. And once again, our keynote speaker, who is already on the stage, Mr. Ralph Cossa, President Emeritus and WSD-Handa Chair, Pacific Forum, United States. And now I would like to give the floor to President Lai. Please.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That after the distinguished speech by our esteemed leader, Ralph Cossa, now that we're in the discussion session for this panel, as you know that from the MC introductions, we have a very esteemed panel that from the former service chief, also the former service member, now the think tank leaders, as well as the political activists that are part of the in the political actions, as well as the civilian organization initiative work on security affairs. So that this panel is about the policy community interactions as well as the collaboration in this region. But I think that for everyone, especially people working on the think tank and on policy, the first thing that people wanted to know or we usually want to do is to assess the regional situations before that we can actually talk about the collaboration among us. And I think it's important right now that when we look at these regions, not only we have the usual understanding about the US-China competitions, the increasing different model of the economic collaborations, but also I think especially this year, we're witnessing a very different phenomena, that is the issue about China. It's not just about the rise of China, but probably a very different China, not being able to continue to rise. Whether it's going to decline, that's a very different assessment. But the dynamics, due to this changing China, will affect all the fundamental assumptions that we have in the past. So this is a very important issue that I hope that this panel to provide us about their assessment and what their recommendation for their future cooperations. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of National Maritime Foundation, India. He is also the Vice Admiral for the Indian Navy. So, Admiral, please.
Thank you very much. I have a presentation, as you can see on your slide, and I will try and utilize this to build on some of the really good points that we had earlier. But before I start, allow me to please express my great gratitude at the personal and institutional level to the TAEF. We have an MOU running with them, which is robust and full of promise. Right, so first I want to talk to you about the desired end state of both the people of India and the people of Taiwan, and that is to assure the economic, material, and societal well-being of our respective people. I believe that the next 2 centuries will be centuries of the seas. And in New Delhi, we certainly believe that over the course of these 2 centuries, India will either be a maritime power or India will not be any kind of power at all. From there, we move on to the statement of policy. And as you know, once you have a desired end state and you articulate that, then that articulation becomes a statement of policy. And and since in the foreign policy department and world, the words doctrine and policy are interchangeable, I want to emphasize that Sagar, of which much was spoken in the last panel by the Honorable Mr. Sujit Kumar, is not a vision of the Prime Minister of India. Sagar is the maritime policy of India, and it is truly our belief that the Indian economy cannot ride on some crest while the economies of our neighborhood are wallowing in some trough. Likewise, if India's maritime policy is Sagar, Taiwan's maritime policy is the new southbound policy. And if you look at the diagrammatic explanation of what is Sagar, it is really this. Sagar represents our dime. It's our diplomatic, our informational, our military, and our economic outreach throughout the region. This is our intended region. It is not limited, once again, it is not limited to the Indian Ocean alone. It encompasses the Indo-Pacific. This diagram shows you Taiwan's new southbound policy. And the reason I've shown this, although there are many diagrams of this in many books, but I thought that one thing which is missing in all of those books is the shading of the oceanic space. And it is the maritime feature of the new southbound policy which will either make it succeed or fail. And therefore, this map really shows you the importance of the maritime space in this area. And the principal maritime interest, once again, common to India and Taiwan, is holistic maritime security. Most people talk about maritime security and immediately think of military security alone, but holistic maritime security is freedom from threats arising in the sea or from the sea or through the sea, and these threats could be man-made, or they could be natural, or they could be combinations of both. We have spoken a great deal about the traditional ones, both in terms of geopolitical constriction, as well as the possibility of state-on-state conflict, and this is something that the people of Taiwan and their government is continuously wrestling with as much vigor as the government of India and its people. And then the non-traditional segment is well known to this audience, and I will not need to belabor that. Then you come to what is our principal cooperative and collaborative set of strategies that will bind these 1.5s together. The first one I want to talk to you about is not on our screen. It is maritime connectivity. When we talk about maritime connectivity, most people have no idea what they're saying. None. There's some guy standing with his arms crossed outside some club, which is really important in both Taipei and in New Delhi, and he says, "What's the password?" And you say, maritime connectivity. And he beams and he says, "Come right in." And you go in and you have a room full of 300 people, none of whom know anything more than this, as to what are the elements of maritime connectivity. So I think that that's a really important feature that we would like to address when discussing our indicative strategies. And at the strategic level, in times of peace in particular, our indicative strategy, our strategy of choice is constructive engagement. India is currently concentrating upon three major but very different approaches to its endeavors vis-a-vis constructive engagement. The first, and I want to dwell on this, is the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which is an open, non-treaty-based global initiative to cooperatively address maritime challenges. Now, the government of India and its Ministry of External Affairs have extremely poorly indicated this as a set of 7 pillars. It is actually a set of 7 spokes of a deeply interconnected web, and the importance of this is that this provides first-order specificity to our policy. And when you have a policy and you have no specificity attached to it, then people ask you stupid questions like, what is happening in Sagar? Nothing is happening in Sagar because Sagar is an desired end state. Nothing is happening in the southbound policy per se because it's your desired end state. Now, what are the specifics in that? And so we have these 7 spokes of thrust lines, and here several nations have already volunteered to lead one or more of these 7 lines of thrust, as you can see on this particular screen, whether it's maritime security, ecology, science, technology. Many of these have already been spoken about in the panels that have gone before. Knowing what the IPOI is not is at least as important as knowing what it is. The IPOI is not some grand plan of India in which we have figured out that you can either join or not join or accept or reject. The IPOI doesn't say this. It says, "Hi, this is the Indo-Pacific. We have some problems here. Do you have an idea?" And if you say, "Yes, I have an idea," we say, "Great. Do you want to follow us? No? Do you want us to follow you? No? Do you want to work hand in hand? No? Do you want to go without India? Yeah, anything will do." so long as we solve the problem. It is based on the principle that there is no limit to what a human being might achieve, so long as he or she doesn't care who takes the credit for it. And so importantly, the IPOI is also not about SDG 14 alone. It is about all 17 of the SDGs. The second initiative of India is regarding BIMSTEC and many mini-laterals, such as BIMSTEC. I want to show you the 7 trilaterals plus the Colombo Security Conclave. So we have India, Brazil, South Africa, India, USA, Japan, India, Japan, Australia, India, Italy, Japan, India, Indonesia, Australia, India, Australia, France, India, France, the UAE, and then India with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Maldives, and the Seychelles. This is our preferred option. The third approach is Quad. Everybody's familiar with the Quad, and I just wanted to emphasize that we think that the Quad is doing exactly the right thing at the moment, trying to stitch the region together in so tight a fashion that China will not have any room for spatial or temporal maneuver. Common thrust lines now of the IPOI and the NSP need to be discussed or at least touched upon. Let me start with marine ecology and maritime resources. If you look at the IPOI spoke of marine ecology and maritime resources and the NSP thrust line of transition to a blue economy, at the bottom of your screen will show you what should be done by the NMF, the National Maritime Foundation, and the TAEF. What ought we to be doing? And this, I think, is generation and advocacy of joint research papers, planning and recommendations. If you take science, technology, and academic cooperation, this session is about what is to be done. And therefore, once again, I think that there is a lot of emphasis, a lot of commonality between these two, and tasking for think tanks is the initiation of capability enhancement training programs in critical and emerging technologies. When you talk about technologies, please don't talk about STEM. Please understand that the social sciences, the life sciences, the humanities have as much of a role to play as anything else. Maritime-specific technical Mandarin language teaching, it's critical if we're going to talk about China. If you talk about disaster risk reduction and management, once again, we had a discussion yesterday, but I think that the tasking for the NMF and TAEF is clear. We need to collaborate on systemic risks to port infrastructure. We need to leverage the National Maritime Foundation's ongoing joint programs with the Indian CDRI, which is the Coalition for Disaster Relief Infrastructure, particularly in its island territory efforts. And if you talk about trade, connectivity, and maritime transport, the NSP and the IPOI are moving almost on the same direction, in the same line, and we don't know it. That is the tragedy of our common, that we're not able to exploit the fact that even when we're together, we haven't a clear idea of it, and therefore, once again, the tasking for the TAF and NMF is shown on your slide. Last, I wanted to touch upon this whole business of 6 elements of maritime connectivity. So when we talk about maritime connectivity, you have to understand, what do you want to connect? Which 2 ports? Which 2 entities? What medium do you want to connect them over? Is it the sea? Is it rivers? Is it river and sea? Is it digital? Is it all of the above? What are the platforms that will move on it? Are they ships? Are they digital entities? What are they going to carry? Are they human beings? Are they cargo? Are they digital streams? What are you going to be doing? And the policies that are put in place to facilitate this connectivity. And finally, what rules-based order do you wish to follow for them? And my last comment to you is this. What is the purpose? What is the real value of a think tank engagement, as we are saying? Very few countries have any idea that track 1 has no idea what to do and how to handle track 1.5. The relationship between track 1 and track 1.5 is usually one of mutual loathing. One tells the other guys, why don't you learn something? The other guy says, when will you ever retire? And this is a lose-lose situation. And yet, track 1.5 can ask questions that track 1 cannot ask. And track 1.5 can answer questions that track 1 cannot answer, while retaining with track 1 the ability to simply deny the value of track 1.5. You know Admiral Chauhan, he talks too much. And therefore, I think that that should give us sufficient room for thought, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Admiral and Chauhan, for your presentations. First, you talk about the Indians, especially Indian Pacific Ocean Initiative, about the policy directions, its relationship with BIMSTEP as well as Quad, and about the its possible cooperation with the new southbound policy. And then you also posed a very important question regarding how the policy itself and the official dialogue, they can interact and push things forward. So next, I'd like to invite Mr. Sustarum Thammaboosadee. He's a founding member of the Future Forward Party from Thailand. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, so I have to say thank you very much, and it is my great honor that I have a chance to join this forum. Last year, our former party leader, Thanathorn, also joined as keynote speaker. And 2 days ago, our former leader again, Pithai Limcharanrat, also come to celebrate for Taiwan National Day. And yes, it's become controversial issue in Thailand. He has been cancelled by conservative group in Thailand, as you know. Okay, if you follow the things that has happened in Thailand 3 months ago, I have to say that we really won an election. Okay, and I cannot get a very clear theory for 3 months because I expect that we are going to get the things that we expect for dream for the better society, dream for more equal society. But now we have to wait more again. And the good news is that I have heard that many of Taiwanese citizens, both in Thailand and in Taiwan, also really support our party. We are the good alliance on the movement on democracy. So on my presentation, I will be talking about the dream of collaboration on the welfare process, that how can we work together. But the first thing that I want to mention about my country is that what is the real problem that we are facing and how can international community can solve it together. Okay, so as you know that nowadays there's a very big problem in Thailand. So the first problem is that the accumulation of wealth, so that means just only the small elite group that control all of Thai economy. Second point is that the rising of precariat or precarious worker, the workers who have to bear the risk instead of the capital class. And the third problem is that middle class squeeze. Nowadays we cannot find the real middle class in Thailand. We get poorer. Even if you graduate from university, you get university degree, you can earn just only small amount of money and cannot pay the debt for your parents and for your student loan. Yes, the high cost of living, the problem of welfare system, also very big problem in Thai society nowadays. This picture is very clear once I talk about the problem of over-accumulation in Thai political economy. So it is the image that shows Thai current prime minister that have taken photograph with the group of business that, according to statistics in 2 years ago, 50 richest families in Thailand has been reported control over 75% of country's GDP. So that's a big problem, and most of Thai public policies always rely on the big business group rather than distribute to the welfare of the people. So this is the thing that has happened almost half of the decade. 3 months ago, we expect that this is going to be in, and all of the budget will be distributed to the need of the real people, 99% of the people. And again, we also dropped that the current prime minister going to change the things that has been happened for over half a decade. Okay. The second problem that has happened in Thailand, we call the rising of precariat or precarious worker. So according to the statistics 2 years ago, have been stated that 60% of Thai workforce, the people who are 18 years old until 60 years old. 60% of them are informal workers. Informal workers, that means they racking off the permanent wage, working without contact, working without welfare, and yes, working without any kind of labor protection. The problem is that it is not purely has happened according to Thai condition, but most of transnational companies trying to set a new platform economy. And most of the time, Thai government support this kind of investment. Okay? Support this kind of investment sometimes in the border city, sometimes in industrial economic zone. And yes, what Thai people get is something that you see in the picture. Maybe they are just a platform rider, they are housekeeper, they are cleaner. This is the things that will happen after Thailand opened for transnational company without any condition, just only asking for their money for investment. Okay, there are many countries all over the world that are going to follow this condition that they get privilege to come to invest in Thailand. And yes, once I arrived Taipei, I have talked with one researcher in Taiwan, and I asked about how much that your students have to pay for university. So maybe it's about 30,000 Taiwan dollar per year, something like that in public university. And I noticed that it is almost the same price in Thailand. The cost of living in Thailand and in Taipei is almost the same. And our currencies is also almost the same. So it's very easy for me for calculation. You'll see that the fact is that for Thai ordinary university students, if they want to continue their university degree, the things that they will get that they have to apply for student loan. Once they apply for student loan and they have to pay back 200,000 baht once they graduate. So that means the dream to become middle class start to squeeze. It's become impossible. They have to work for 3 jobs in order to get the same quality compared with their parents' generation. And yes, finally, high cost of living. It is something that becomes a big problem. According to our income and compared to even if New York City, the statistics say power purchasing parity say that Thai have paid 50% higher than people in New York City have paid for everyday life. So that means we are working hard nation. People in the farm working hard, people in industry working hard, but our pay is very low, our welfare is very low. You may say that we are too poor to pay tax, we are too poor to start the welfare state policy, but in fact is that, as I have mentioned, the over-accumulation problems is become something that all of the resources never distribute to ordinary people. Okay, finally, it is the things that are really in common for civil society that we are fighting for advocacy for welfare policies in Thailand. First thing is student loan, their forgiveness. Second one is income guarantee for specific careers, universal pension and universal security. So this is the things that our civil society asks for. Yes. But finally, I suppose that we are not fighting alone. Okay, we can learn from Taiwan. I have talked with some of you here, and you say that maybe we can join a multi-alliance again as our younger generation have worked together 2 years ago. And now we can learn from experience from Taiwan. We can learn from our neighboring countries. For example, Indonesia, that how can we overthrow the military government, and how can we organize with the monopolized business capital. Not just only the budget allocation, it's also about philosophical sharing, success experience. And yes, we need global civil society movement, not just only in the term of politics, in the term of welfare policies as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, especially regarding what's the domestic situation facing Thailand and your plan for the reform. Now, the next, I'd like to invite Mr. Enoch Wu, our beloved the Farmer Wu, that he's the director of Forward Alliances, a civilian initiative for the security issue in Taiwan. So, Wu, please.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to thank TAEF, Yushan Forum, Dr. Xiao, for this opportunity to sit here amongst esteemed colleagues and leaders in their respective fields. Thank you, Dr. Lai, for moderating this panel. And it's a pleasure, I have to say, to be able to sit here with leaders in the political arena, military, academia, politics, and activism, to share a little bit of our work and how we might be able to work together, help each other in advancing values and principles that we all share. We come from different societies, different countries with different characteristics, different trends, and different challenges, and certainly very different priorities. We are all seeking for various types of freedoms, advancing these freedoms. Freedom to participate in politics, freedom to take part in economic growth, equitable economic growth, freedom to practice religion, and freedom to exist. I think that is our common challenge here. The security challenge that is certainly a theme of this year's forum and this year's discussions. Now, the topic of this panel, as it was assigned to me by Dr. Lai, is a tricky one. It combines policy community. It asks the question, how can policy community get together to foster greater public participation in tackling these challenges and in fostering, promoting Indo-Pacific collaboration. It's a lot of concepts wrapped into one, but I think at the core, what we are discussing here today, and it's what I would like to share with everyone here today, is how to utilize, how to leverage civil society in confronting our most pressing challenges, okay? And in the area of security, if I may offer some of my perspectives, I am the founder and the current director of a nonprofit, a non-government organization in Taiwan called Forward Alliance. We have a mission that is to involve the public, involve citizens, involve voters in together shaping a more constructive security policy. So that means two things. It means, one, educating the public and voters on security issues and priorities so that we're more informed, so that we can help shape policy direction. And two, it means putting together a direct action program where average citizens can take part in making a difference, in making our country safer, making our community stronger. In short, it's about building public resilience. My personal background, I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in government as a staffer, and currently I work in civil society. And it's with that experience that I think I can say that I've been up close and I've seen the powers of incentives. I've seen the reach, yet also the limits of government. But I've also seen the potential of civil society, which is really what makes us stronger. And I think when we talk about public participation, whether in tackling security challenge, building resilience, or in pushing for economic freedom, religious freedom, any of that, for me, it comes down to two key words. One is agency, and one is trust. And what do I mean by that? Agency, people have to believe that their efforts make a difference. Right? People have to believe that what they do day to day has an impact on their family, on their community, on their country, for them to show up day after day, to protest, to sacrifice, to risk their livelihoods, perhaps even their personal safety. And just to give you an example, Taiwan is at a very different, we're all at different stages in our democratic development. In Taiwan, I think it's safe to say that civil society participation, civic participation doesn't come with the level of cost or personal sacrifice that it used to decades ago here. But it's still important for citizens to understand what they do can move the needle. We offer crisis response training for citizens because we believe in the event of a major disaster, whether natural or man-made, communities have to have the ability to help themselves, help each other. And so we provide a host of training civilian responders from medical to search and rescue, to crisis communication, to navigation, sheltering, all these building blocks of crisis response that in normal times we rely on professional first responders to do, but we understand that in a contingency, in a major crisis, we need citizens to help. And in putting together this program, we found that our teams at the end of their training, they've spent 40, 50, 60 hours of their personal time showing up with their families, with their colleagues, with their neighbors, attending these workshops. But in the beginning, it was not a 60-hour commitment. In the beginning, it was a 3-hour commitment. 3-hour commitment to understand, hey, even with 3 hours of time, 3 hours of commitment, you are that much prepared to help your families. We have young parents that bring their kids to our trainings, and then their kids go home, and we got this a letter that we received a couple weeks ago from a father who attended our training with his two young sons. And he told us his mother, elderly 86-year-old mother, fell at home, cracked her head open, unfortunately. And as his wife was calling 911 seeking help, his 12-year-old son immediately grabbed a towel and began to apply pressure on his grandma because he learned in training, this is what you do when your family is bleeding massively. This is what you do. I share this story because it's a 12-year-old boy who, through 3 hours of class, not just learned the basics of crisis response, of medical aid, he built confidence. Right? And that is the basis of resilience, right? If every 12-year-old has that level of confidence that, hey, I can make a difference by just extending my hand, extending a helping hand, I can make a difference in helping my family, helping my neighbor, helping my community, that's how change is made, right? A 12-year-old boy at a time. And it's through experiences like these when that citizens come back 3 hours later for another 3 hours, another 3 hours, until they realize, I've just put in 40, 50, 60 hours of my time towards something that I didn't think I could do 2 months ago. So it's incremental, but it's also helping people understand that they can make a difference. So in terms of policy implications, what does that mean, right? I think we're at, in Taiwan, it means policymakers need to establish and create that condition in civil society, that feedback response system where voices and needs and demand signals in civil society are heard and recognized and responded to. In other countries, other societies, it may not be a matter of governance or policy, it may be a matter of civil society pushing and understanding that change happens incrementally a day at a time. I am way over time, but speaking of time, but there's the second point I wanted to mention, which is trust. In Taiwan, we've made a point in communicating with the public sector, with the government, with the professionals, if you will, the importance of involving civil society in tackling our challenges, because government can't go it alone. Government isn't large enough to go it alone. But more importantly, because the country in the democratic society, country belongs to everyone, right? So there is intrinsic value, there is worth in having everyone participate in deciding, in charting the future of our society. But it's also important for civil society to recognize that we need the government's assistance as well, right? This goes hand in hand. We need all hands on deck to tackle these challenges. And the way that we've done that at Forward Alliance, if I may share very briefly, is it's important to step out of our comfort zone and identify the needs and requirements and gaps in your stakeholders, in your partners. And in striving to satisfy those needs and helping your partners, instead of asking, how can my partner help me? What resource can you give me? How much budget can you allocate to me? Right? We have to turn it around, and when we start addressing the needs of our partners, I think that's how we start building trust, and we can begin to build a more collaborative working relationship. In the case of crisis response, instead of asking the government, you need to let us do this, you need to allocate budget to do this, we turned around and asked the government, what is it that you're trying to do? And how can civil society leverage our strength to help? In crisis response, the government wants to extend and wants to build community-based crisis response capabilities around the country. So we recognize, okay, the government and civil society have that common goal, have that common objective. And we start thinking about, all right, well, how can we help? It's certainly not by budget, because the government has more money. It's certainly not through manpower, because the government has more manpower. But it's through our speed and agility and adaptivity. Civil society has a lot of constraints. But there's one thing that we have, which is innovation and the ability to act fast. And so what we found through our crisis response program at the community level is that we're able to test and experiment and try out programs very fast at the community level. We can pilot a program, pilot a class, decide the week before and roll it out the week after, gather feedback the week after that, and try it again in a new iteration. And that is experience, that is a capability that the government doesn't have the luxury of. So what we found is that if we can underwrite the program development risk for government, we can begin to work together. Government relies on us to try out programs, and then we hand over our results and our lessons learned, our curriculum to the government for the government to roll out nationally. And we found that this has been a pretty good way to work with government in Taiwan to build this community level crisis response capability. And so I understand not every country is the same, every society has different challenges and constraints, but hopefully those experiences can perhaps add a little bit of a perspective towards our discussion this morning. So with that, I hand over the mic back to Dr. Lai.
Yeah, thank you, Enoch. And I also share your struggle in terms of how the community initiative could be actually embedded with the government in terms of the security awareness for the society and the resilience. And also, I think that the incomplete process for Taiwan, especially in terms of security apparatus for the civilian control, that also contribute to the complexity that you faced. So this is another very difficult issues that we need to tackle upon, just in addition to the security threat that we're facing by China. So next, the last but not the least, I'd like to invite Ralph Cossa for your remarks.
I can't imagine adding much to what I've already said, so I would just, if I could, perhaps comment on a few things. And I think, as our last presenter noted, cooperation between civil society and government is essential. I think back to the terrible tsunami in Indonesia many years ago, and the U.S. military working with Australia, with Thailand, with others, working with the military in Indonesia. The first thing they did was bring in civil society groups that had great distrust, not only for the U.S. military, but for their own military, because of years of history. By the end of that recovery effort, it had made possible cooperation between the government and civil society that then allowed for different peace efforts throughout Indonesia to occur. So I would like to stress very much, I think those points. Beyond that, I think I've already talked too much, so I'm very interested in hearing your questions and questions from folks in the audience. Thanks.
Thank you, Rolf. As you can see that all the presenters just present their views. Now we open to the discussion. Not much time left, but still have some time for the questions. So anyone would like to raise the, I see a hand back there. Yes, that lady. Please identify yourself and who you want this question to be addressed. I think you are on.
Hello, hi, my name is Samara. I'm from Bangladesh. I am the co-founder of an organization called Bonni Shikha, through which we work on gender and sexuality. I don't know if there's anyone else in the room from Bangladesh, so I feel truly honored. At the same time, unfortunately, it says Bengal here at the back of today's brochure, but the name of the country is Bangladesh. So hope that can be corrected as well. My question was actually an open one to all of the panelists. I know that Taiwan is very progressive and has gender-sensitive laws, policies, and legislatives. However, in Bangladesh, we are very much behind in terms of catering to marginalized communities, to women, and to other sexual minorities. So I was wondering, under the Southbound policy, when we're talking about creating a new blueprint, whether lessons are being transferred from within organizations from one country to the other, what kind of work is particularly happening with Bangladesh, and also there is usually exchange of information and advocacy happening between CSOs because we work on social justice, but in terms of the government's work, I was curious to learn what is happening between governments, because one of the speakers said that the government can't do it alone, and the CSOs definitely need to support, but I feel like in terms of human rights, it's usually the work is falling more on CSOs and not on government. So I was curious to learn about that as well, particularly because our elections are also approaching soon. And the Vice President was speaking about the voice of the people, but in my country, that we're falling short on that aspect. So curious to hear about your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, friends from Bangladesh. I'd like to collect probably one more. Are there anyone to also like to ask questions or just provide comments? Anyone? Okay, right now I did not saw any hands. So anyone would like to address our Bangladesh friends? They ask questions. Yeah, first I like to Emerald.
Thank you very much. Being a proximate neighbor of Bangladesh, I think we have some serious amount of empathy and connection between the governments of Bangladesh and India, and therefore by extension, under the Southbound policy, as you said, with the government of Taiwan. And I can't speak for the last one, but I'm sure there are better interlocutors than me on that. I just wanted to make 3 points for you. The first of them is, and this is a general point, when you start a discussion and commence your discussion from a human being, you end up at a given point at the end of your discussion. When you start your discussion from a nation state, you are likely to end up at a different point. Now the trick is how to bridge these 2 points of view. Very frequently, we are guilty of flying our aeroplanes at 38,000 feet. At 38,000 feet, anybody can fly a plane. The trick is how to make that 38,000-foot plane land without crash and burn. That requires this bridge. So the situation is that very frequently policy makers and policy shapers have a very high comfort level with one another because they are all flying at 38,000. And at 38,000, you need to know nothing. And so the question shifts from what you know to who you know. And that takes you to a completely different area of both frustration and inability to understand. So I, first of all, do not think that the Bangladesh situation is quite as grim. But it depends, as has already been mentioned, different interlocutors on this panel and in the Yushan forum per se have come from different countries with different perspectives. So when we talk about a country of the size and population of Taiwan, you compare it with a country of the size and population of India, and then you compare that with Bangladesh, whose population density is simply unimaginable in Taipei. The people of Taipei think that they are crowded. They have no idea what a crowd is. And therefore, asking what governments might do, the answer really lies in having think tanks and track 1.5s and track 2 organizations, such as your own, actually inform governments, not only in your own country, but in external countries, and then see whether each of these policies, whether it is the IPOI or it is the new southbound policy, they have thrust lines. Now, can those thrust lines actually meet the aspirations of the actual human being that your organization is concerned with? It's a function not of what the government can do or not do, which the government, by enunciating policy, is doing. It is thereafter what will the think tank community, the non-government organizations, the track 1.5s, the track 2, academia, if all of them are going to fly at this height, if we as specialists are going to tell generalists general stuff, then our value addition is actually 0. Our comfort level is 100%. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Rolf.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to broaden the question a little bit, if I can. One of the benefits of being old, one of the few benefits of being old is I remember when we used to go to Japan for cheap electronics. Then that moved to Taiwan and Korea. Taiwan, when I started in the field, was famous not for chips, but for these little umbrellas that you would put in your drinks. Today, Taiwan is making the most sophisticated chips in the world. My point is, Japan, Taiwan, Republic of Korea, that perhaps was the past. China's the present, but the question is, what is the future? Clearly, India is part of that picture. Clearly, Thailand is part of that picture. Vietnam is certainly part of that picture. Can Bangladesh also be part of that picture? It will come down, in my view, to one phrase, and that phrase is good governance. I think multinationals today are looking to see where to go next. In part, it's because the cost of living in China now is, there's no longer cheap labor in China, but there's also rule by law rather than rule of law. So companies are being concerned and they're looking elsewhere. When they look elsewhere, they want to know that a deal that they cut today is a deal that they will live by tomorrow. That's certainly the case when you go to India, when you go to Vietnam, Thailand, others. If it is not the case in Bangladesh, then I think there's a responsibility of the government to make that the case, to make yourself attractive. The opportunity today is immense because, as I said, the companies are looking for where to go next. Where's the next Japan? Where's the next Taiwan? And for you to be in that position, good governance, I think, is the key. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enoch,
please.
If I may. So thank you for the question, and thanks for this opportunity to share my thoughts. It's a shame that you are not on stage with us here. So hopefully in future forums we can rectify that. I think if you look at some indicators, Taiwan, at least in gender rights and equality, seems to be on the right track. We have a commander-in-chief, sitting president for the last 8 years, who is a woman. If you look at civil society participation across organizations, whether religious or non-religious nature, our volunteer base nationally is around 65-70% women. So that speaks to the citizenship level of civic engagement in gender terms. And I think to Professor Cossa's point, a lot of it is a regulatory issue. It's about setting up the governance and the framework to grant those basic rights so that women can run in elections, can participate in politics, but it's so much more, this is what I want to say, than just having the basic rights. It's also policies. And I'll give you an example where Taiwan is continuing to looking to improve. For example, every society has has needs to care for our young, for our elderly, for our vulnerable. And in Taiwan, the burden of care has fallen disproportionately on women. And that remains the case. And despite the fact that we do have the rights, the regulatory framework, the governance, through policy and resource allocation and our budget decisions, we've created an environment where, despite having a woman commander-in-chief, we can do more and do better in terms of creating that economic environment for women to fully participate in society. And I think that has to do with so how is policy shaped? Well, policy is shaped by policymakers, by cabinets. And so an area where we've fallen short, and I think this is why a forum like this is so constructive, is that when you see if cabinet members are predominantly men, then policies reflect that predominantly male view. And priorities reflect that predominantly male priorities. And when, I can tell you from personal experience, when I don't share the same burden, I make different decisions. And so that's an area I think we can all, where we can all do better. And having this candid conversation helps us see our respective collective blind spots. Gender equality is important because it is right, but also because it has an economic impact. And I think speaking that language to folks in government, policymakers who care about economic growth might be one way to do it, right? Why exclude half your population who can participate in growing your country? It's you are half the sky. We are half the sky. Why create burdens and obstacles for ourselves? So basic rights like these, I think we might be at different points in our public discourse, but I think there's a lot to learn from each other. Labor rights is another that one day I know we will tackle together. The topic of a lot of our Yushan forums is Southbound or ASEAN or Indo-Pac engagement. Well, we have a lot of guests here in our country who work with us at our homes, in our healthcare facilities, in our factories, right? And so labor rights isn't just securing rights for your citizens, but securing rights for everyone under your care, all your guests. And I think if we can tackle these basic challenges, I think I think we'll realize that a more equal society, it means a more just society, but also a more prosperous and more secure one. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Enoch. I know that the time right now we run out, and I also was alerted that I need to end this on time. But just before we end it, I like to say that Bangladesh is part of the New Southbound policy target, but when we talk about the Taiwan and Bangladesh engagement, there were the legacy issues, especially involved with Taiwan Foreign Ministry, which that needs to be addressed upon. And also the signal, if the Bangladesh is willing to work with Taiwan, the signal has to be sent from the Bangladesh. I'll just say that, and also we noticed that Bangladesh has its own Indo-Pacific strategy, which is a normative, and we also noticed that. So just end up here, and please join with me thanking all the panelists at the stage, and thanks for this very fruitful conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the moderator and the panelists. And now we would like to invite the moderator and the panelists to have a photo call on the stage. So please rise and move to the center. Thank you very much. And look at our photographer. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a round of applause to the moderator and the panelists for the wonderful discussion. Thank you. Please look at the cameras. All right, so one more, give us your thumbs up. Please look at the camera. All right, thank you very much. Thank you to our moderator and the panelists for the wonderful discussion.